Hi, I'm Grace Lynch. Welcome to my channel. This is part two of Circumnavigation of Trauma. I'll read my thing. The concepts and methods presented here are my own original work unless otherwise cited. I'm not a licensed professional in any capacity. These are simply the tools I developed and used to navigate my own life and circumstances. Any meaning, value, or application this work holds for you is entirely yours to determine. Now, at the end of the last video, I was talking about the difference between the physical experience of trauma and the mental experience of trauma. So the body is transformed by experience, and we see this through perception, the act of perception. Physical things impact the ears, the eyes, the nose, the mouth, the skin, and these cause physical changes in the cells and the nerve cells that are irreversible. The cells go back to something like their original state, but never their original state. There's no such thing as a return perfectly to what had been before. Similar but not identical. And because this is a transformation of the body, the brain has to regulate how it is still in charge of the same thing. And because also to make a working model, the brain has its own sort of digital image of what is happening in terms of the body. And my understanding of that is a little complex. How the brain does that is that the brain has direct experience that it gets from itself, and it also imports from other human beings. My limited knowledge is that it does this through mirror neurons and oxytocin. It imports what it learns from other human beings as if it were information. It is not. But it can borrow trust that when somebody else tells me that an orange is edible, even if I've never eaten an orange before, I can borrow trust and take it in as if it were information, as if I had found out for myself by eating an orange that it's edible. And this is part of our language system. And so how I visualize that is that when I come up with knowledge for myself that I learn myself, it's coded as a kind of information, and it's coded in terms of a kind of safety. If it's a relationship with myself, my direct experience, I consider that red safety. And then if I bring it in from the outside and I import it through the mirror neurons, oxytocin, and relational things, I bring it in as if it were information, but I code it differently with a kind of blue safety that comes out of trust between me and the world. So there's self-trust, there's self-world trust. And I believe these are two different chemistries that are similar, but not identical. When the mind can work these together, of course, it creates a kind of purple safety, which is very flexible, very powerful. It can go back and forth. It's very useful, except since this happens as a child, it can be very difficult to understand that there is a real difference between things I know because I've lived through them and things I know because somebody else has told me about them. They are actually two different entities. They are not the same cognitive things. So that's how I keep track of that. So what I'm guessing is that when the mind needs to make a framework to process any kind of experience, it's actually doing a digital processing. So trauma comes in, this huge signal, and in order to make it into meaning, to make a digital approximation of the physical experience, to do what the brain does, it has to separate it into, how do I understand this? Do I understand this? How much of this do I understand from direct experience? How much do I understand because of relational experience, borrowed experience? So, because the mind is trying to figure out how to understand the experience to express it and relate. Because the mind believes that its safety requires all the time relational connection with other human beings. It is not true. Human beings can survive sometimes by themselves, but the mind doesn't believe that. If the mind can't resolve everything in terms of relationality, it can freak right the fuck out. And so what I'm guessing is happening in trauma resolution is there are actually two traumas. The body experiences the trauma as enormous signal. The brain has to make, that's analog because the body is an analog computer. So that analog computers can take enormous signal, but they can't do really fine output. Digital, the brain is deciding all the time. It takes stuff and it processes it. Like I think one noticing at a time in terms of complete noticing is the same way that an AI will break things down into a string of tokens that's linear, one token at a time, and apply different weights and things. I think the brain is all the time creating a digital model for the analog experience. And it can do that really well. It looks like language. And we create meaning that can be really detailed. that matches what we know about digital systems. Digital systems can take like incredibly complex things as long as it's in a really narrow bandwidth and make very, very sophisticated outputs, very, very precise. One of the biggest problems in digital computing is signal degradation because the fine nature of the output, if you get a bit off, 1 or 0 off, it can change what it is. You can become more and more reliant on the accuracy of the digital expression. But it remains that digital systems fail at the input buffer level if you put too much signal in. Now, what I'm suspecting is actually happening in trauma. Through the naive approach, the physical experience is too much for the brain to handle and it shorts out. But if you break it down and consider it as two different things, the physical experience is this analog impression, which is an enormous signal to the nervous system. And then the brain's job, which is entirely inside the body, is to figure out how to be the manager of the body in this new state. And in order to do that, the brain only understands things in terms of what it can make the digital model of. So it has to take the signal and it has to break it down into the self meaning, the red safety information, or the self-world meaning, the borrowed meaning, which is the blue safety. It's not really information. It's like it. It's close enough that it's very useful in an evolutionary sense. If you tell me that there's a monster in that cave, maybe there is, maybe there isn't. But evolution, I think, has taught us that a lot of times, if I take your word for it and you're not crazy, it's really good for me to not go to that cave. And I believe that this gave us an advantage, so it became helpful and useful to import other people's experience as if it were direct experience and treat it as if it were information, which it isn't. But so then that's, I think, what the brain is doing. It's making a digital image of the analog experience. That works great as long as the initial analog signal is inside a certain homeostatic zone. But in the case of trauma, an experience can be so impactful that when the brain tries to make its digital model of it to figure out how to be the managing organ, the input buffer gets overloaded and it fails. But the brain doesn't understand that it's not going to die. If the brain can't make the digital model, since it only understands the digital model, it feels like it's going to be the end of the world. Well, that is a trauma all of its own. And because the brain can't resolve it and can't escape it, it stores that entire input somewhere, the same way that the body stores things that it doesn't understand. It doesn't eliminate it. It's just like when we had trans fats. The body didn't know what that was, so it stored it as fat. This stores, the brain, I believe, stores it as an unresolved, undigested memory. And so learning to circumnavigate things, what I found is that just like with emotions, to learn how to have emotions without converting them into instructions, that was a skill, a life skill. I had to consciously put myself in a position where I would have the feelings and run through the different cognitive reactions and not behave, but be honest with myself about what the reactions were and ride out the chemistry of it. And then I had to consciously pay attention to my inability to find an effective cognitive response, not meaning the same as being able to survive the experience. And a lot of times it's difficult. A lot of times these efforts to find a cognitive response are ways that I believe if I don't figure it out, I'm not going to be safe in my world. And I have to survive lots and lots of those initial things and come to the experience where when all of that effort is defeated, I'm still in the world and I am surviving. Therefore, my understanding that I will not survive if I don't figure it out is incorrect. And time and again, experience has taught me that if I'm willing to consider that my understanding is the problem and outlast that reaction and not stay in the childhood mode that it's the end of the world and the sky is falling, that I can arrive in a state that is transcontextual. I'm still in my body. I'm still perfectly aware, lucid, experiencing things. I'm just not locked into the cognating quasi-addiction. I break the dependency on equating experience with expression. I believe that children can't do that. They're not sophisticated enough. But I believe adults with the right kind of support and as we grow up can come to do that. My life experience has taught me that many, many times in life, I will experience something that I cannot understand, and life requires me to keep going. Lots and lots of experiences. There are situations where, I would think that I have to solve it or something tragic is going to happen. My mind will be completely convinced, and it is not true. The difficulty is it's very hard to look at my own understanding and question that my mind is the problem. My mind is the thing that's getting in the way of solving it. So until I am willing to go to that place and entertain the possibility that it's my understanding, that I'm starting in, I guess I'll say it like this. There are many paths from Rochester to Boston. There are many paths leading into Boston from somewhere. There are no paths that go from Rochester to Boston that don't actually begin in Rochester. Now, if I have an understanding, no matter how elegant, that gets me to a solution that does not actually begin where I really am, it will never be an effective solution to my problem. And I can switch things around and try to get at a solution that solves that models my life, and it will fail again and again and again. And the problem will not be because it's an ineffective solution. The problem will be that my mind does not know how to encapsulate the problem beginning where I am. Once I understand that I do not have an effective model from my own experience in the moment, no matter what the reason, so that I have that to rely on to build the path to the solution, I will never see a way of solving the problem. I liken it to this. In some kinds of problems, the only solution, some kinds of problems are like the need to see a sunrise. But if I live in a world in which I have always faced west, and everyone I know has always faced west, there's not even going to be any language for the east. And I will spend all of my life trying to find different ways to look west when the solution physiologically to my problem is to experience a sunrise. And I will spend enormous amounts of time and never solve the problem. When, if I let go of my understanding and all the understandings and listen to my body and my intuition, I need a sunrise, and just turn around and wait a limited amount of time, a sunrise will happen and the experience will solve my problem. And this is one of those cases where it's possible, I found, to have a narrativistic mind so powerful and a cultural experience so powerful that there's not language for the experience, the solution, the experience that will be the solution. And if I stay locked into the narrativistic thinking, trusting that my understanding is correct, but the failure is an inference, then I will never solve the problem, because I will not question whether my understanding is the mistake. If I have to but if I question that, I'm asking myself to do something pretty sophisticated. I'm asking myself to surrender my cognitive structure and trust that my body knows how to continue to survive. Is there evidence that I can do that? Of course there is. Every time I go from one understanding to the next, I've effectively surrendered one form of consciousness and grown another. That entire time, when I'm between one understanding and the next, if I have an effective understanding inside that, then why do I need to get to the new understanding? If I don't have a new understanding in that interim, then I'm demonstrating physically that I'm surviving without one. So my own life can demonstrate that this model actually works. It's just a little difficult to change my thinking and embrace it consciously. If I do that, I believe it's possible to move from a linear approach to trauma resolution to a circumnavigational approach, to where I let the experience happen. I go all the way through the chemical experience without cognitively resolving it. And when I get back to a calm where the body has survived it, then I can use the calm that the body has survived, since when the experience happened and when the things calm down, as more information, and then that will make it possible to correctly integrate and find out how to cognate about the trauma. But it's going to require building something in there and letting the body do something that the mind does not know how to do and doesn't have the power to do. So that's the second one on circumnavigating trauma. I hope you like it. Take care.